This is a video to help you with Workbook 3. In Week 9 under Learning Materials, there's some additional homework and there's also a PDF called Week 9 Homework Discussion. The Week 9 Homework Discussion has been designed to help you with Workbook 3, so I'm going to go through that. We're using the wellbeing1.sav file that you used in the Week 8 and Week 9 additional homework, so it's the same file. You've already answered question 1 in the Week 9 homework because it's asking about whether you can see any underlying factors in the correlation matrix with the 8 items, which groups appear to be interrelated, and suggest a possible explanation for the intercorrelations within each group of variables. So that's already been answered in Week 8 and 9. Basically, items 1 to 4 correlate quite highly with each other, but they don't correlate very highly with items 5 to 8, and items 5 to 8 correlate quite highly with each other. They don't correlate with items 1 to 4. And so basically it looks like there's 2 factors, items 1 to 4 and items 5 to 8. Items 1 to 4, when you read them conceptually, they seem to represent a personal development item. So I'm not interested in activities that will expand my horizons. People who disagree with that might be interested in personal development. I gave up trying to make big improvements or changes in my life a long time ago. Again, if you score low on that you strongly disagree, you're probably someone who's interested in personal development. I think it is important to have new experiences that challenge how you think about yourself and the world, and I enjoy being in new situations that require me to change my ways of doing things. If you tend to strongly agree with those things, you'll be interested in personal development. Items 5 to 8 seem to represent an autonomy factor, how independent or autonomous you are. So item 5 is sometimes I change the way I act or think to be more like those around me, and item 8 is I tend to be influenced by people with strong opinions. So if you strongly disagree with those items, it's because you are an autonomous person who's not influenced by people around them or strong opinions. So questions items 6 and 8, I'm not afraid to voice my opinions, and item 6 and item 7 is I'm not the kind of person who gives into social pressures. So someone who agrees with those 2 items is someone who's autonomous. So that's question 1. Question 2, we need to run a factor analysis, include a table of correlations and Bartlett's test of sphericity, use maximum likelihood, which is a type of factor analysis as opposed to principal components analysis. So basically a factor analysis doesn't use all of the variance in the items, whereas a principal components analysis does. And with the factor analysis, the idea is to try and reproduce the correlation matrix as faithfully as possible using the factors to reproduce the items. So basically the factor loadings are like regression coefficients for each item. So you multiply the score, each person's score on those items by the factor loading and add them, factor loading in each factor and add those together to get to reproduce the correlation matrix for each item. And you want that correlation matrix to be as similar as possible to the original correlation matrix using the original items. So use maximum likelihood to extract the factors, Kaiser's criterion to select the number of factors. So basically Kaiser's criterion will tell you whether the factors are suitable, the items are suitable for factor analysis or not. And basically if a factor has an eigenvalue less than 1, then it's suppressed or discarded. Use an Opperman rotation, which basically allows the items to rotate, the factors to rotate from the original solution, and in the options select the sort and blank alternatives, which means sort so that the items with the highest factor loadings are listed first, and items with factor loadings less than 0.1 on a particular factor are also suppressed. I'll show you that in a second. Upload your SPSS, don't worry about that bit. And then the question is, has the SPSS factor procedure identified the factors you expected? So we go down to our data file, analyze, dimension reduction, factor. We dump our 8 items, don't worry about age and sex, they're just demographics. Dump the 8 items we want in the factor analysis in the variables box. Select descriptives, you can ask for univariate descriptives if you want or not. The items are anchored by 1 for strongly disagree and 6 for strongly agree. So the univariate descriptives will give you the mean. The coefficients asks for the original correlation matrix, which the question asked us to get. The reproduced correlation matrix is the reproduced correlation matrix that I was talking about, using the factors to reproduce the scores on each item for each person, and then finding the correlations between those reproduced items. And then KMO and Bartlett's test of sphericity will tell us how well suited the data are to factor analysis. So extraction, so instead of principal components, it asks for maximum likelihood. We want the scree plot because we'll use probably the scree test is usually used to help you decide how many factors you want to keep and leave the rest as default. The other options is default. For rotation, we want the Obelman rotation, which means that the factors are allowed to correlate with each other. We don't need the scores for this one, I don't think. I'll ask for the scores just in case. And then options, this is where you sort by size. Says ask for the sort and blank option, so sorted by size, and then the blank option is suppress coefficients with factor loadings less than 0.1. So you'll get some blank boxes in your pattern matrix, and you get your data. So this is the descriptors. We ask for the descriptors, so we get the item means. This is the initial correlation matrix, which the question asks for. This is KMO and Bartlett's test of sphericity, so you generally want that to be greater than 0.7, and you want Bartlett's test of sphericity to be significant, and that just shows that the data are suited to factor analysis. Notice the initial communalities are not 1 for each item because we're not using all of the variance in each item. And then this is the amount of variance that was extracted that's explained by the factors. And then this is the amount of variance explained by each factor. So that's the eigenvalue for each factor and the amount of variance explained. And you can see all the factors with eigenvalues smaller than 1 are not listed, they're discarded. So the third factor has an eigenvalue of only 0.6, so we probably, if we were to rerun this analysis for any reason, we probably wouldn't consider selecting running the factor analysis with 3 factors because the third factor explains only a really small amount of variance. Here's our scree plot, so any factors below the elbow are generally discarded, so it suggests you'd only keep the first 2 factors. The factor matrix we don't need to look at, we'll just ignore that. The goodness of fit test, that tells you how well this reproduced correlation matrix fits with the original correlation matrix at the top, and you want this not to be significant, because if it's significant, it suggests that the matrices are significantly different. So that goodness of fit test is good, shows that it's fitting well. And it also gives you the residuals. So this is the residuals between these reproduced correlations and the original correlations in the correlation matrix at the top. So you want no residuals greater than 0.1 and only 1 or 2 residuals greater than 0.05. So we've got one here greater than 0.05 and another here. But more troubling, we've got one here that's greater than 0.1. So what we might consider is deleting the items that are causing this this higher correlation. So it's question 8, which has also got a higher residual here, sorry, not correlation, higher residual with question 1 and a higher residual with question 5. So we might consider repeating everything else about the factor analysis is looking good so far except for the residuals. So we might consider repeating the analysis excluding question 8. And the pattern matrix is what we want to look at. We want to look at the factor loadings here. So you can see it is as predicted. Questions 5 to 8 are forming one factor, and questions 1 to 4 are forming another factor. Question 1 does have a small factor loading on factor 1 as well, but it's less than 0.3, so we don't need to worry about that. You can ignore the structure matrix for the moment. So yes to question 1b, yes, so far the factor analysis has produced the factors that we expected. So question 3, is this a good factor solution? Discuss how well the factor solution meets each of the criteria listed on page 271 of the text. This is actually page 254 of the text. And basically the factors that are considered are what we've been talking about already. So the amount of variance explained, so you want your analysis to explain more than 50% of the variance, which ours does. As you can see here, we explained 57% of the variance, which is good. You want simple structure, which is that basically that the items aren't loading on more than one factor, and you've got more than 2 items in most of the factor, or all of the factors preferably, which we do. We've got 4 items on each factor, and none of the items are loading with more than 0.3 on more than one factor. And you also want the factors to make conceptual sense, which they do. That's the autonomy factor, and that's the personal development factor. And you want a good goodness of fit test and small residuals. So the only problem here is some of the residuals are a little large. So for that reason, we would consider repeating the analysis. So you need to explain those points that I just talked about. So we need to try to improve on the factor analysis. So we'll do that by getting rid of question 8, I think. Now make sure when you try to improve on the factor analysis, you only ever exclude one item at a time. Don't exclude multiple items. Just change one thing at a time, okay? So we'll go 7 and then we'll have a look. So there's our correlation matrices. We'll go, the data is still suited to factor analysis. By the way, you should also probably look at the correlations here. You want all of the items to have a correlation of at least 0.3 with another item. If one of the items doesn't have a correlation of at least 0.3 with another item, you probably want to delete it. So now the factor analysis is explaining 60% of the variance, so it's improved slightly already. And going down, we've still got goodness of fit test is still fine. And when we look at the residuals table, we've now got one residual there that's greater than 0.05 and another one there, but we don't have any greater than 0.1. So the residuals table is now looking good. We've still got simple structure here. So we've still only got items loading on one or the other factor, and you want item loadings generally, you want them to be reasonable, generally greater than 0.4. But just if you've got an item that's loading greater than 0.3 but it's not loading on any other factor, then it's probably okay. So I would say that that's a good analysis now. So question 5, once you've agreed on a final factor solution, describe the sort of person who would score high on factor 1 and who would score high on factor 2. Give a possible name for each of the factors, which we've already done, and describe the correlation between the factors. So what you need to do is look at the items. So question 6 is not afraid to voice opinions. First of all, let's have a look at the factor loadings and the items. So question 6 is I'm not afraid to voice opinions, and it's a positive loading on factor 1. So basically what this means is if you strongly agree with that item, you will score high. So somebody who's not afraid to voice their opinions will show a positive score on factor 1. So somebody who doesn't give in to social pressures, that's a positive loading. So if you strongly agree that you don't give in to social pressures, you'll strongly load on factor. You'll get a strong high score on factor 1. This is a negative loading item. So if you strongly disagree that you change to fit in with others, you will get a high score on factor 1 because it's a negatively loaded item. So basically somebody who strongly agrees that they are not afraid to voice their opinions and they don't give in to social pressures will score high on factor 1, and somebody who strongly disagrees that they tend to change to fit in with others will get a high score on factor 1. Now factor 2 is a bit more difficult because we've got some more negative loading. So if you enjoy new situations loads negatively on factor 2. So somebody who strongly disagrees that they enjoy new situations will get high scores on factor 2. So these factors will probably correlate negatively with each other. Gave up on big improvements is a positive scoring item. So someone who strongly agrees that they've given up on big improvements will tend to get a high score on factor 2. Someone who tends to enjoy new experiences, that's negatively loads on factor 2. So somebody who strongly disagrees that they enjoy new experiences will tend to get a high score on factor 2. Not interested in expanding horizons is a positive loading item. So somebody who strongly agrees that they're not interested in expanding new horizons will get a high score on factor 2. So somebody who strongly agrees that they've given up on making improvements and they're not interested in expanding horizons will get a high score. And somebody who strongly disagrees that they enjoy new situations and new experiences will get a high score on factor 2. So generally somebody who's not autonomous will get a high score on factor 2. So if somebody somebody who scores higher in factor 1 is somebody who agrees with personal development, is interested in personal development, and somebody who scores higher in factor 2 is somebody who's not very autonomous. So they're going to be negatively correlated probably. So the question 5D was describe the correlation between factors 1 and 2. So there's a negative correlation, a weak negative correlation between the factors. So just looking at the solutions in terms of the wording, if we go down to question 5D, it says describe the correlation. There is a weak linear relationship between autonomy and interest in personal development. There is a slight tendency for people with more interest in personal development to have more autonomy. So because this is a negative item, if you score low in autonomy, if you score high, if you have a low score on factor 2, that's because you're interested in personal development, and so you will tend to have a high score on autonomy because it's a negatively worded item. So the best thing to do is to just draw this graph like this. So somebody who scores high on factor 2 has low interest. Somebody who scores low on factor 2 has a high interest in personal autonomy. Someone who's highly autonomous is up here, high scoring, and somebody who's lowly autonomous has a low score on factor 1, and the items are negatively correlated. So just to simplify things, just set up this graph like this, figure out what somebody who's scoring high on factor 2 would have low interest. You need to figure that out. And somebody who's scoring high on factor 1 would have high autonomy, and they're negatively correlated. And that's it. I'm sorry about that message popping up the whole time, but I've tried to record this so many times. It's like my 3rd hour in attempting to record this. So I can't possibly do it again. But please feel free to ask me some questions.